I understand this stuff very well. Like I'm a victim of police brutality. I walk with a limp because I had my kneecap shattered when I was in prison and then put into the hole for 2 months until I didn't walk with a limp anymore, and then had added charges thrown onto me because they said I attacked 6 different cops at once, right? And none of them lost their jobs, and like none of them had any problems. And all of them had to work together to make sure that none of them got in trouble, right? Like I understand this stuff very well, but
well, that's yeah. No, go ahead. Sorry.
But yeah, we do use that same logic already when we talk about white being bad. When people are like, "Yeah, it's bad," like that's white people shit. That's bad. You know what I mean? Like it is using that same logic. It's the system of whiteness, but I don't think people are going to attack people just for having like same race kids,
right?
Because
that's my point, though, is that none of us see a problem with this, yet it still does contribute to racism in some way, right? Having different races contributes to racism, right?
No, having the hierarchy of the societal hierarchy of race, having the societal hierarchy of race is the bad thing, and people do attack that at the same level.
Sure. So do you think having police at all is the bad thing?
Having the system that we have now that holds people back and causes
Freemz' Discord.
I think someone just came in my Discord.
Hello.
A disco rat.
It's voice box.
Voice box.
But yeah, like it's.
But that's my point, is that we would want to change the system, not just say that the system is inherently
When
broken.
When we do that, that's what we talk about. When people are talking about like getting rid of whiteness, they're not talking about like take out all white people. They're talking about getting rid of the unnecessary hierarchy of whiteness.
Is that what you meant?
Like we attack that the same way we do like the police system. We already do that. So yes, you technically are correct, but you worded it in such a weird backwards way that made it sound way worse than what it is.
It's supposed to sound like something that.
Did you mean like white, like getting rid of whiteness by not having like real actually white?
That's what he should have said.
Well, that is well, yes, racism, like yeah, of course. And so my point is that like I'm trying to frame it in a way to where it's something that you would never do. Like you would look at it and say,
"Know what whiteness is, though, Tom."
Oh my goodness,
I love you, Tom, but whiteness isn't like.
I understand like the academic understanding of it, probably not yours, but
oh my god.
Aiko, this is a good time to add to your soundboard. Archer just shouting, phrasing.
But yes, I'm trying to frame it in a way to where it's something that you would say like, hey, this is the same exact logic, but I would never actually think this thing, but I would think this thing. How can I use the same logic for this and it makes sense to me? But when I apply it to this, it doesn't make sense.
Okay, bitches, what's going on? All right,
Vivian, I've already had this conversation with you, Vivian, and I disagree with your entire framing of it.
That's fine.
I'm sorry. I can leave. I didn't know that this was a stream thing.
You're good.
I don't want Tom to get dog piled on. Like
I am fine. I'm fine.
Dogpiled, right? I'm shitting on every single one of you. All right, every single fucking person in this chat room has had a basic fucking bitch take on ACAB. All right.
Oh yes, please.
Wait,
ask Trash Can and.
Hey Viv, what was my take on ACAB? Real quick, Viv, what was my take on ACAB?
I don't know what your take on ACAB
was.
Anyway,
I didn't go one.
What was my take on ACAB?
Yeah, I just hate when people go into so fucking like condescending shit.
You're a dipshit, commie. All right, no, listen.
Hey, I thought we were just chilling. Come on.
I'm chilling. Look at me. This is me chilling. Okay. So it's education corner. All right. Let me ask y'all a question.
Viv is chilling in Cedar Rapids right now.
let me ask y'all a question. Right. If you do any of you think that the law as it stands right now, right, or ever has stood in history, has been completely fair and just to every person who lives in that country?
No.
Of course not.
No, I don't think anybody believes that.
Fantastic, brilliant. So, when you argue for a change in the law and you have to go protest to get that change for the law, who turns up in order to clean you out at the end of the day?
Depends on who's
When you
protesting.
can protest according to when the government thinks it's appropriate for you to protest and how the government thinks it's appropriate for you to protest.
Do you think that we should be able to just go take over roads and highways
answer the
whenever we want?
question.
The
Yes,
government
answered it.
does.
I
That's
think
what
that
protest-
protest is only useful when it disrupts capital, right?
The answer to her
and when it
question is the
disrupts
law.
Capital, you will be engaged in unlawful activity or civil disobedience or whatever you want to call it, right? It doesn't have to be like straight up fucking violence. It doesn't have to be like taking over buildings and hurting people or anything, right? But like if you only protest, i.e. like go get yourself a permit, keep yourself to this one particular street, stand around, chant with signs and shit, that is very, very fucking easy for the government to ignore. Incredibly easy for the government to ignore. Protest is most effective when it disrupts capital. And if you try to disrupt capital in any way, the police officers will be there to stop you. They will round you up, put you in the fucking park in the middle of, the Occupy Wall Street, handcuff your hands behind your back and fucking pepper spray you in the face, right? And there's
Yeah,
not a
and for
cop on
those who didn't get the vibe, the answer to Viv's question is the police. That's what the answer to that question is.
It's always the police, because the police are the paramilitary arm of the state. The state is basically the entity that tries to have a monopoly on violence, says when violence is morally okay to carry out, right? And if you agree with the state, I think you're fucking stupid, right? Because I don't think that it's okay for somebody to come kick down your fucking door and drag you away to a jail cell because you sold an ounce of weed, or because you didn't pay your taxes, or because you flipped somebody off in a government chamber or whatever, right? I don't think that shit's okay. But the state has that monopoly on violence, and in order to enact that violence, they have the police. The police is an extension of an unjust state. And if you disagree with the actions of that state, as every single fucking person in here does, you are at risk of having violence meted out upon you by the state. And the police are the tool that they will use to do that. And that is why all cops are bastards.
There was a case very recently, and like we talk about it quite a lot on our show, but it's this guy named Javier Merdiaga out in New York. He like got charged with what was classified as a pedestrian, what was it? A pedestrian infraction, something like that. It sounds like something like anodyne, like jaywalking or something. So he got picked up by the cops, and the judge in the case threw the case out. Basically said, you're not guilty on this, just on procedural grounds. But because he was in police custody for like a couple days, he got picked up by ICE, and he has been in ICE detention in Louisiana for 16 months now. And that's like what police do at this point in time. Even if they don't think they're doing it, it's what they do.
So
yeah, I mean, I don't know how many cops hung up their badges during the protests over the last summer, for example, right?
Right.
Probably only a few. And that's how you become a good cop. You become a good cop by stopping from participating in the brutality and violence that is meted out upon any person who tries to advocate for the civil rights of historically oppressed or marginalized groups in pretty much any Western nation, right?
So you are, yeah. So yes, so you are saying each individual, correct, right?
Yes, every single individual has sworn an oath, right, to uphold unjust laws and to protect capital over people.
So when I say that all cops are bastards because they are part of a system, regardless of what position they work, you agree with that?
No, it's not. It's not as simple as like they are part of a system, right? This isn't some like, oh, but you think capitalism is bad, but yet you can't participate in capitalism. I'm very clever, fucking meme, right? Like
You
it's
bought a
not.
soda.
It's not this. It's not the same
You have
thing
an iPhone.
remotely, right? People are like basically coerced to take part in capitalism because they kind of have to just live any kind of quality life. Sometimes they have to even be able to survive, right? Whereas, like, being a cop, you have chosen and you think that it is just in your own mind, right? There's not a cop out there who signs up to the police force and says, hey, I'm gonna sign up to join the police because I think that all the laws of the state are unjust and I'm evil and I want to like fuck people up, right? I mean, maybe there's a couple, but those are definitely bastards, right? But like they all go in there thinking that, you know, that it is a just action to enforce the will of the state on you know, individuals, and that's what we find, especially as anarchists, especially as like activists or protesters. Like that's what we find like most objectionable, because we're always going to end up suffering the brutality of the state enforced through their paramilitary arm, the police.
True.
It just still sounds like you're saying because they're part of a system, like, or are you saying because their intentions are, they think their intentions are noble, but because they're
No, it's
naive?
because they're going to be engaging directly in committing acts of violence against the populace whenever they're trying to fight for their rights or to disrupt capital.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I'm a capitalist, so I guess.
Do you think there's
No,
no?
you don't understand what
means of
capital
production?
is.
How much means of production do you own, Tom?
You own a big business, but
I run businesses, but
Like, do you produce commodities?
no, or service business.
Oh, okay. I'm just gonna guess here, and I don't mean this disparagingly, but I'm gonna guess you like go to like, I don't know, some kind of 9-to-5 job or some kind of general job. You collect a paycheck.
I mean, I collect a salary, and I don't work a 9-to-5 job though.
Okay, but you collect a salary as a paycheck. So no, you're not a capitalist. You are a worker.
I mean, I also run my own business. Like, it's not
mm,
the same thing.
but you're also a worker.
Oh yeah, what's your business? What's the market cap on that?
The market cap. I could tell you what the market cap is on it. I run car detailing businesses, like mobile detailing.
How much do you think that brings in per year? Just estimate. I don't need you to like, you know, open up your books or anything. Just estimate it.
I can't remember. I want to say a
You're
couple
not a capitalist,
100,000.
You're a worker.
Okay.
Oh no.
One way or the other, like the word capitalist is made as like a disparaging word, right? But like,
No.
if there are socialists who
No, it's a
believe in
technical term.
social,
It's a
no,
technical
no. Capitalist was made as a disparaging word. That is why it came.
What? No, capitalist was
You know what?
made to describe the people who control and own capital, i.e., the means of production.
And sometimes people, which for the same purpose.
Do you employ workers, Tom?
Yeah.
How many?
3.
3? Okay.
This sound. I'm
Is it
getting
is
worried.
the business self-sufficient? And what I mean by that is, like, are you still like trying to grow it? Is it profitable, or is it just something you're trying to build?
Yeah, it's not profitable right now.
You're not a capitalist.
Okay, so if you believe in socialism and you are therefore a socialist, you are a capitalist if you believe in capitalism. I may not be a capitalist in the sense that I own capital, is what you're
Yeah.
trying to get at, but I'm a capitalist in the sense that I believe in capitalism.
And that's what I understood you to mean.
That's
So
what
do
he
you think
understood
it's
as well.
inappropriate? Do you think it's inappropriate? Do you think it's wrong? Do you think it's immoral for people to interrupt the flow of capital for like any reason?
I mean, I guess there are reasons that are necessary.
Cool, right. So do you think it would be a bad thing, for example, to like I don't know, blockade a road or something in opposition to a company that's using really fucking questionable business practices? What if we stopped like lorries coming out of the Nestle factory, for example, because of, you know, how they treat their child slaves in Africa?
You might need to explain the concept of a lorry.
I mean, I suppose it
Oh,
depends
sorry,
on
a
like
truck.
how
My
much
bad.
you're like, how many other people are suffering because of it, like how much traffic you're going to have to hold up, how many people are not going to be able to make it to where
They have
they're
child
supposed to go
slaves,
as well.
dude. They have child slaves. What are we supposed to do beyond that, right? We get our signs out, we pick it out out the front of the government. We do that for like how long now? 60, 70, 80 years? I don't know how fucking long Nestle has been a company, right? But like have we made any sort of like significant gains? Weren't they talking about like privatizing water a few years ago? Nestle?
Mhm.
Like,
they're making
it seems to me that they just
they're making a lot of inroads in that, actually.
Yeah. So it seems to me that they just keep getting bigger and bigger, more powerful, trying to privatize those things which people need to survive, using child slave labor to like increase their profits, increase their gains, and increase their power. And you think that like standing outside with a couple of fucking signs is going to like create any kind of major change?
Are you asking if people standing outside with signs will make any major change?
Yeah.
Probably not.
Right. So the acceptable means of protest that the government allows you, right? Those are means which are ineffective in many, many situations.
Yeah, I agree.
Right?
Yeah.
It might scare a small business into like maybe not firing one of its employees for being gay or whatever, right? But like in the broader scheme of things, they're pretty ineffective. And so you've admitted that you have to use unlawful methods of protest in order to effect change, right? Otherwise, the child slaves keep being exploited, keep being used, and you know, Nestle privatizes fucking water.
Oh, I haven't admitted that. Like, I think the best ways to affect change is to hurt somebody's wallet, right? Like
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Hurt their wallet.
Well,
absolutely.
I think the best
The
protest
disgusting
is
part
to
about
stop
the-
buying their products.
Oh my god.
That's okay. So let's bracket that for a moment.
What?
Just the disgusting part about the Nestle story, just to buttress what Viv is saying, is that they held a contract in California to own water rights that were below market value in terms of their payment to the state of California, while major fires were going on and people needed both water to fight fires and water to survive in an emergency situation.
How do you boycott that? How do you boycott something that people need to survive?
You know, it doesn't even need to be as basic as something like Nestle where they're providing like bottled water. We saw this just last week, and this should like kind of titillate you, Tom. But you had like people freaking out because they think like Coca-Cola is going to cancel white people. How do you boycott Coca-Cola? Is that like an actual thing you think is going to happen? Because I'm going to guarantee you it's not going to happen in any meaningful sense.
Maybe you can get some people in one town or maybe even one state to stop buying shit from Coca-Cola, and that will probably hurt them a very small amount, but like they're a multinational.
I'm not getting in my toilets without the Coke. Come on.
Click on click on Casaban's link.
Oh yeah, I know a lot about this actually.
Breastfeeding. Nope,
Oh,
we
yeah.
got
No,
it.
it's actually really like it's awful.
It's very
bad.
fucked up. Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
Nestle basically marketed formula to a bunch of global south countries and gave people free samples, which then they watered down and caused malnutrition and stunting in like a generation of babies. it was really fucked up.
I think it's actually worthwhile to even take a step back from that. These are the obvious examples, and I think everyone's right for bringing them up. But like I just have the assumption, correct me if I'm wrong, but like all of us here, we have cell phones, we have smartphones. Where do you get into it with boycotting component part manufacturers who do not market to consumers, but come through consumer products? So you think of a company like Foxconn. We can go down the laundry list of things wrong with Foxconn. They have to literally, and sorry to go this direction, but they literally have to have suicide nets in their factories around China to avoid like people dying who work there. And that is not a consumer facing product in the way that an iPhone or a Android device is. That is just something that it's built into the product. How do you boycott that? That's a question for you, Tom.
What was the product again? I didn't understand what you were saying. The
He's saying,
difference in product,
Foxconn, like manufacturers who are so far removed from the products that you're actually buying that you probably don't even know that you're buying from them.
Yeah, like they have a giant umbrella company. Everything
or
is like...
maybe an even better example, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, Kenny, but it's like, there are like 6 companies that produce 98% of what's in the grocery store. Like how could you ever possibly with your wallet affect any significant change in any of them?
Yeah, so you guys are saying if we were able to protest violently, these would be better options, right?
Not violently,
I'm not saying
inconveniently.
Inconveniently, right? And
no, the point is
like
actually
Colin
that
Kaepernick
boycotting is not an actual political thing. It's not political anymore.
What's not?
It doesn't work. Like, and 9 times out of 10, when a company is boycotted, it'll be boycotted by one particular group, right? So like one particular demographic, usually like left wing, but also recently like right wing as well, like with the fucking Nike bullshit or whatever, right?
Or the corrupt stuff.
Yeah, and the outrage that this creates, the fucking media frenzy that it creates, equates to like hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars in some cases, of free advertising.
Yeah, like Gillette.
It's not. If it helps these companies rather than hurts them more often than not.
Oh yeah, now there's the quote unquote boycotts where you have the opposing group will participate in purchasing more of the product in order to spite their political opponents, like with Goya, where you have the people from CPAC like, yeah, we love Goya now. I can't wait to make some tacos. It's just like, what? Hey, bitch, you don't even know how to make a tortilla. Get the fuck out of here.
So again, what is an example of an inconvenient protest? Like kneeling during a football game. What is your comparison to?
That's more inconvenient protest.
It's emotionally inconvenient, which is why it was so good. It was so good because it didn't take up any more time. It didn't actually disrupt anything. People were just triggered.
And people still fucking hated it, right? So MIT Nerd put some good examples in chat, so I'll just read those. That's fine. Blockading roads, expropriating necessities, constructive vandalism, equipment sabotage, those sorts of things.
Oh, I would also throw in the mix there, just in addition to what Viv said. Think back to the teacher strikes a couple years ago in West Virginia and a number of other states. Those were actually incredibly effective protests. They did not get 100% of their demands, but they did get certain demands met. And the thing that's kind of lost on people about those protest movements was that it took months of planning and it took months of coordination, not just among teachers, but bringing in various different groups of people in the process. So one of their demands was like making sure bus drivers got a raise. And so bus drivers got involved. You had people who were working on the rotunda of the West Virginian state capitol, and they realized the work that the teachers unions were doing and said, we're not going to work on the rotunda until you actually like do something about what the teachers are demanding.
Yeah, there are some anecdotal examples that we can give of this, but most of the time, peaceful protests.
It's a real thing. You can go look it up.
What do you think anecdotal means? It's fake. What do you think anecdotal means?
No.
I think it's used in a way that people think it's fake.
Okay, it is an anecdotal example.
It's a rhetorical style.
Okay,
but no, it was a real thing.
Yes, it is an anecdotal example, but when we look at and I'm not against violent protests or inconvenient protests in any way.
Let's not say violence.
Inconvenient protests in any way.
If that's like going from 0 to a billion, okay?
But when I asked for examples, I was given violent examples.
Property, that.
Wait, what examples were you given that were violent?
No, I have a very specific question.
If you look up violent
about teacher strikes,
what was violent? I didn't say there was anything violent about it. When we look up,
I just insinuated that, or at least
I was talking about Vivian's examples when she gave a bunch of examples.
So what was violent about those examples? I agree with you, by the way. I agree that there are other kinds of violence beyond punching somebody in the face. But why do you think that they were violent? Those examples.
Didn't you say property destruction was one of them?
Yeah, it was constructive vandalism, I think was one of the examples that MIT Nerd put in chat.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if we want to use a different definition. If I look up violence on Google, it'll include property destruction. But my point was going to be that statistics or studies show that peaceful protests seem to get a lot more done than any other sort of type of protest.
What the studies show is that peaceful protest movements in pursuit of civil rights tend to be the catalysts for change, right? They work closest with the governments and so on. So you got your fucking Martin Luther Kings and your fucking Gandhis and all that sort of shit. That's what those studies are based upon. But what those studies don't talk about is how that those movements, right? Gandhi's movement is not one that involved no civil disobedience, for fuck's sake. They were being carted off by the police constantly for blockading areas, sitting protests, all that sort of shit, right? This is non-violent resistance in terms of they wouldn't use guns or whatever. They wouldn't go beat up the police. They would just allow themselves to be arrested.
I mean, the one that
they were also elevated by the Indian government at the time because they were the
example of a good protester.
Exactly. You had communists within the Indian Communist Party and broader organizations that were far more radical than Gandhi's demands, and Gandhi was elevated above.
That's the point, right? That's the point that I was going to make. Is that it's all important to note that none of these non-violent protest movements happens in a vacuum. They all happen alongside violent protest movements.
Okay.
And it just so happens that the governments prefer to engage with the non-violent people because it's if you don't engage with me, you're gonna have to engage with those crazy fucking communists.
Sure.
Who are
hold on.
You can't have an MLK without a Malcolm X.
Come on, guys. You're veering way off. The studies that I'm familiar with are Erica Chenoweth, where they're only talking about protests that are only violent versus protests that are only peaceful. They're not talking about any that have the mixture of the two.
The world doesn't exist like that, Tom.
It does when we're talking about these studies. Yes, it does. If we're talking about which one is more
I'm familiar with the Chenoweth studies and the studies and the protest movements that they denote as non-violent do involve significant amounts of civil disobedience, which are things that I'm advocating for. They just don't involve the harm of other people, right? As the protest's goal. They don't involve the physical harm of other people.
What do you mean as the protest's goal? Their goal isn't to hurt people, or it's just by accident?
Or rather, it's not part of their modus operandi to go out and beat the shit out of people or kill them, right?
Yeah.
That's what they classify as a non-violent protest. But vandalization of most of the things that I listed, vandalization vandalizing property, blockading, all that sort of shit, right, are things that those protest movements engaged in that are classified as non-violent in that study. Like, I mean, Gandhi is one of the prime examples in that study, right? And like,
Yeah,
they absolutely did engage in civil disobedience.
well, what it isn't protesting like in general civil disobedience?
Well, no, not if you go and get yourself a permit from from your town hall or wherever, right? And agree the area in which you're allowed to protest, how long you're allowed to protest for. You don't engage in any property destruction. You don't engage in any violence. You just sort of walk up and down the street and like wave your signs in the government designated area at the government designated time. Then that would be like a completely non-violent protest that, as we agreed earlier, is largely fucking ineffectual, right? But those protests do exist, sure.
This thread got a little bit lost, but I do want to like follow up this question for Tom. Like, do you think there like were elements of violence to the teachers' protests that occurred throughout West Virginia and then like the broader South? Because you kind of implied that, then you backed off of it, and I'm just not sure what your actual position is.
Again, I don't know anything about that. I was only referring to Vivian's examples.
Okay.
I was when she gave a bunch of examples of what protesting would be helpful. She listed off a bunch of stuff, and I said some of those were violent examples.
So, do you think it was violent? Just to kind of go through this process with you, do you think it was violence when unionized construction workers who were working on the rotunda in West Virginia said, "We will not work on the rotunda redesign until you like meet the demands of teachers"? Do you think that was violence?
No.
Okay. All right.
Here's an example. If there is a piece of hostile architecture that is solely built to prevent unhoused people from being able to sleep on it, is it violent to disassemble those parts of it so people can sleep on it?
Can you say that again?
Are you talking about like the homeless spikes thing?
Yeah, homeless spikes, the benches
Good night,
with
trash
the...
can.
Oop, good night, trash. The
Good night,
benches
trash
with
can.
the middle of the benches with the random armrests shoved in the middle.
Night, trash can. Love you, buddy. Last night, me and...
By the way, go follow Trash Can 1312.
Last night, him and I just had like a really fun little chat where we watched like a couple bad movies. It was super fun. I love Trash Can.
Sorry, Midnerd, what were you saying?
So constructive vandalism is what I'm talking about. When you take a piece of hostile architecture and you take disassemble or break the or add cement in some cases. I probably should give directions. The hostility out of it, or if in particular there are things that are inhibitive to either transport, or if there's a lot of security devices, or just various things that are inhibiting quality of life, largely either for the benefit of the state apparatus or mostly these days for a private company. Is it violent to either sabotage them or modify them? So like the hostile architecture.
I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm not really sure what you're asking or what.
I feel like
benches, here's a simple one, Tom. Benches in Central Park, they put additional like looped armrests in the middle of them so that it's impossible for unhoused people to sleep comfortably anywhere in the park. Is it violent to cut those added armrests off so that the benches can be slept on?
So that they can't be slept on?
So that they can be. They can't be now.
Have
That's
you
the
ever
hostile
seen...
architecture. Is it violent to cut the hostile part of the architecture off and either steal it or throw it away or whatever so that people can sleep on the benches?
I don't know. Probably.
Do you know what they're referring to? Like, have you ever seen in front of a store? I mean, like in New York and
pavement
stuff,
spikes, yeah.
Yeah, that's like they're literally just spikes in front of it so that homeless people can't sit down or fall asleep there.
No, that's messed up.
Some hostile architecture photos.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'll often see it under like highway overpasses because those like are basic protection against the elements, and you'll see spike strips laid down so that people can't actually like sleep there.
Yeah,
I,
in a lot of cities, they'll have the big display windows for shops that tend to like close around 6, and then there's no real foot traffic, and there are these big mattress-sized spaces between the window and the sidewalk.
So wait.
They put
We
spikes in
got a good example. We got a good example that Tom agrees is like at the very least not violent, right? Like, so do you think that like actually removing those spikes or whatever could be a morally good action, even if it is an unlawful one that you wouldn't encourage? Do you think it could be a morally good one?
Yeah, probably.
Cool. Do you think there's a single cop in the United States who, if called about this incidence of vandalism that somebody has undertaken, would go, actually, no, I'm hanging up my badge. I will not arrest somebody for committing a morally good action?
Probably not.
Cool. Every single cop in the United States is a bastard, according to you right now. That's all I'm saying. You're agreeing that they would engage in violence against this person who has committed what you think is just a good action, right? Yeah.
The nicest cop you know will leave an unhoused person out below freezing in the middle of the night, knowing they have nowhere else to go.
Yeah, I don't think that just because they've like committed a good action that now it's okay for them to break the law and therefore people shouldn't arrest them.
So I want to kind of
if the law's unjust, why should it
want to
still be a law?
piggyback off of what
It shouldn't be a law.
Moment. I want to piggyback off what Viv is saying for a moment, because look, you've already admitted that like you find this particular practice to be disgusting. You find it to be immoral.
What
do
practice?
you consider the practice of like spiking areas? Yeah, the hostile architecture where it basically like adds spikes so that homeless people can't be there. You seem to agree with that, as far as I understand you. If you consider that to be an open avenue where what we would traditionally consider to be vandalism, wrecking that type of stuff so that like people who are homeless can still have those opportunities or still have that thing available to them, then my question to you becomes like, well, what's your lowest threshold for violence? Because I don't seem to understand it. I think you and I would agree, punching somebody in the face, that's violence, that's bad, don't do it. But you seem to have a very peculiar definition that includes property. And then I have the question of what's the lowest threshold of property destruction that you consider to be violence?
Because I'm willing to bet I can name one that you'll call violent and name one that you will say is not violent, like the bench thing.
You said what is the least amount of force that I would not consider violence or that I would consider violence?
Yeah, basically,
my question is, what's the lowest threshold of violence against property that you consider to be violence? Capital V, an actual legal crime.
I don't know. I have no clue. Throwing a plastic bottle against it, or maybe a piece of toilet paper. I don't know.
Wait, you would say that like throwing toilet paper at a house is violence? If this is like, I don't know what kind of protests you think are nonviolent.
I don't know where this is going.
South Park, where
What?
What's your lowest threshold of violence? So the hostile architectures thing, you seemed willing to agree it was morally good, but do you still think it is violent to alter or destroy the hostile architecture?
Yeah, probably. Like I don't think that the problem in this case is the architecture. I think the problem is that there's not places for homeless people to sleep. The benches shouldn't be the place for them to sleep one way or the other.
That is true, but until there is, until because people are homeless and need shelter like right now.
But and seeing as the hostile, and seeing as the hostile architecture is getting built instead of places for homeless people to sleep, why not deal with the hostile architecture, since it's probably a bit more difficult.
I'm
to
not
expropriate
understanding
an
where we're
entire
going.
area.
Like, do you guys?
It does actually cost money to produce spikes that you put all over the place to stop homeless people from sleeping there. It costs money. It costs resources, time, planning to do that.
So is the point that we shouldn't have cops? Like, I know that's Viv's point, but for other people here, do you get? Yeah, go ahead, Mittner.
For me, the point is the absurdity of calling most property destruction violent. At least
I don't have to call
personally
it violent.
Kind of absurd.
Yeah, I don't have to call
I
it violent. I can
care
use
about
a
that. That
different
seems
word.
very semantic to me.
Yeah, I don't.
But then I'm thinking of if we can be slightly okay with the hostile architecture, then where can we scale up to? Like, what is the threshold? Like we asked. Like, I'm guessing sabotaging construction equipment has a pretty firm line somewhere before it in where the threshold is. But hostile architecture maybe sort of is on that line.
Yeah, look, all I'm going off of is like a dictionary definition that says behavior involving physical force intended to hurt, damage, or kill someone or something. So, like, I don't have to use the word violence. We can use a different word. I'm not married to that word.
Okay, good, because violence is a very intense word especially in the context of protests and
but by law, in these studies,
right?
they're going to be categorized as violent.
Fuck studies, literally fuck studies.
Shh.
Fuck them. Who's running them?
What?
Don't fuck them. Fuck studies in a bad way.
I want to just acknowledge, and I don't think that we've talked
abused.
about it yet. Yeah, well, I want to acknowledge,
It's not the study's fault. It's the fact how they are being used.
Well, your study is not using the same definition of violence that you are, Tom. Is basically what I was saying.
Okay.
Yeah,
Those
well,
non-violent
I want-
protests engage in actions that you would call violent under the definition you've just given.
Yeah. So
By
I
your
went
standard,
to
almost every
several.
protest is violent except for a few that are scheduled and nothing happens.
Yeah, and I want to touch on this. This is important. So I went to I went to a handful of BLM protests in DC in the last year, and what got portrayed as violence occurred at these protests is not the protests engaged in violence. That is not what happened.
The cops attacked the protesters.
I can give you like a very crystal clear play-by-play of exactly how violence played out at a protest, right? So went to this protest. It was like really well organized, like 10,000 people went to the Capitol, and then after the big main event, like a splinter group broke off, marched to the White House. That was maybe 1,000 people. People started trickling out. The cops, and in this case, it was like the cops in DC, the Metro PD used to protest. They tend to be very chill as far as police departments go with regards to protests, because there's literally protests every single day in DC, every single day. So they're just used to it, and they tend to be pretty chill. However, at the White House, it's the Secret Service, and they have no fucking chill whatsoever. Zero chill. So they had parked a couple vehicles out in a square, behind where they'd set up their lines, literally where the protesters were obviously going to congregate. So eventually a couple yahoos just decided to break all the windows on those cars. And is that violence? I don't know. Doesn't really matter. But what was the immediate response? The cops basically formed a line of shields, started beating them with their batons, and pepper sprayed a whole bunch of people. Then they set up lines and kettled in the area and started closing in. And of course, the crowd is going to then escalate in response to that. So the crowd starts chucking water bottles. They start engaging in more activity. They start rushing towards the cops. And then it's a back and forth of this escalating violence. So the nature of violence at these protests is not simply, oh, the protesters engaged in violence. I got so frustrated watching national media coverage and listening to my parents tell me how it was unsafe to be in DC and how they were worried about if I was going to die because of what was being said about the violence in DC. It is not how it is portrayed. Like people were talking about looting. Looting happened nowhere near where the protests were even happening. Like looting happened up where I live, which is in Friendship Heights, which is miles from downtown where the protests were, and in Georgetown, which is like way out on the west side of town. Looting was like not even connected to the protests, but like if you believe the reports and how it gets analyzed in a study, then it's all lumped in together. So like it can be very misleading. I just want to acknowledge like violence is not a simple binary existence.
Yeah, it's crazy how those protests were portrayed, because we covered that shit for like a couple of weeks on the fucking on the Raw stream, right? We were doing like 24/7 coverage of the protests, and like I think the statistic came out something along the lines of like 90-something%, right? Like 96%, I think it was, of the protests that were supposedly non-violent. But the ones that we watched that were violent, like we saw lines of protesters, right, chanting and shit, and then police would go, "This protest has been declared a riot," and like just start fucking marching towards them with shields, firing off flashbangs and tear gas, and like
exactly what happened.
That means that the protest is now a violent protest, but like the police are the ones who've like initiated that violence. Excuse me, sorry, I'm kind of ill.
I hope you feel better.
No, you sick.
Tom, question for you. Do you know what kettling is?
So kettling is where the police basically block off streets in order to funnel protesters into a consolidated area so that they can control them, arrest them in mass, or yada, yada, yada. At this protest that I just described, it got to the point where I was like, ooh, it's getting a little hairy. I am not down to get arrested. We had a plan for if we got arrested, like we knew it was a possibility, but I was like, okay, it got too hairy for me, you know? So I was like ready to go, and I went in the closest direction to go and get on the DC Metro, and the police had literally formed a line to block off an entire street and would not let me leave the protest in that direction. I had to go like 3 blocks in the other direction because they had blocked off this street, and then the other side was the White House. So literally there was nowhere for me to go but south. I had to go south like 2 or 3 blocks and then around to get to where I wanted to go, because the cops were kettling, blocking off these streets in order to drive the protesters into a central area. And there's the famous clips of the people being kettled in DC and then them flying helicopters overhead to basically harass them. I don't know. It was very weird.
The reason I asked that question, and I really want to hear from Tom about this, is we're using the term kettling has an official basis. It's the way the cops term this particular strategy for organizing protest. And so when you see the discrepancy between the police as an organized force who've been trained in this terminology and trained how to work against it in this particular strategy, it's called kettling. Like, do you think that there's like moral equivalence between protesters who are unorganized and trying to do their best to, you know, protest whatever they're protesting versus an organized force that's designed strategies to disperse this and heighten the problems of it?
Escalate the violence.
Yeah, again, I'm not against violent protests in general.
What's an example of one that you would support or have supported?
So like, I guess what was it? I always forget the name of this city. The Ferguson riots. They created a lot of.
What faction was justified in that?
A lot of property damage to government buildings, mostly, especially cop cars. What was it? They even burnt down some government buildings, if I remember correctly.
So which faction in the Ferguson situation do you consider to be justified?
What do you mean, which faction? Like, which group of people?
Well, there were 2 basic factions within that conflict. Which faction do you think was justified? There were the the alt-right marchers who eventually murdered Heather Hare, and then you had the people who were protesting the alt-right.
Wait, what?
Those
That's
specific
Charlottesville,
folks.
not Ferguson.
You're confusing Charlottesville and Ferguson.
Oh, I'm sorry, I got my seat.
I was about to say, I didn't hear anything about
The
this.
cops and
this.
protesters.
My bad. I got my
Fucking typical white theory bro, bookhead fucking commie, fucking sitting there lecturing people on Marxist theory, doesn't even know about the Ferguson riot. Fucking typical.
I
deserve this.
I fucking love Mittner so goddamn much.
Right on cue.
I deserve this. Curb your enthusiasm.
No, I can.
Just return to Monk, dude. Just keep watching my stream. Return to Monk.
But yeah, no, Ferguson. So Tom, yeah. So in Ferguson, what the government, the destruction of government buildings? You say you feel that was justified?
Yeah, Atlanta during the protests over the summer also had a lot of damage to police precincts, cop cars. They took down, I think they might have even burnt down a post office. They took down a lot of like, what do you call them? The things that you put change in when you park. I can't think of the, I want to, meters. Yes. Yeah. So yeah,
So like burning the precinct in Minneapolis.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Minnesota.
But this is we're in so different territory now, right? So so Tom agrees that like violent protest is sometimes like morally good, right? We've got that several times, all right? And this conversation was originally about like ACAB in general, but like if you agree that that kind of protest is good, right?
Yeah.
Like it's a morally good thing to engage in. Okay, and you know we've had some vague examples, but we've had some very specific examples as well. But all of these examples, right? You still think warrant a violent response from the state through the police, right? Because I remember when we talked about the hostile architecture thing, you said although you think that these actions are good, you think that people still shouldn't be able to break the law, and that we should essentially use violence against them, right? Through the police in order to like cart them away to a fucking prison cell or whatever.
Right.
Right. And I don't really see how those two views can be congruent. So can you explain to me how you sort of reconcile this idea that you can be engaging in what you think is a morally good action, right? And yet you still deserve to have violence meted out upon you by the paramilitary arm of the state.
Yeah, because I'm not worried about what's morally good when it comes to the law. I'm worried about the law, right? The law still has to be consistent one way or the other. So even though I think that this is a necessary action to protest against the government still has to arrest you for it. Yes.
Well, how
okay,
much
this is
murdering
actually
can they do first?
The government still has to, or it is right for the government?
They should still arrest you.
Why?
I actually think there's a really interesting underlying thing here, which is, you know, okay, so you want to mention the law as it exists, which fine. The law as it exists is the law as it exists. Then there's the moral question. Should the law be this way? And the thing about that question is that gets to what do you actually want to change? What do you think that kind of change looks like? What can actually happen to, you know, make a more just society? And then there's a third element, which is kind of underlying that, where if you take the law at face value and you say, this is the law, we should respect it as the law, even if we wish to change it.
Yeah.
Then that begs the question of, well, if you wish to change it, then you understand there are problems with it. There are inequities in how it's meted out, and that needs to be addressed.
Right.
So what would some of those inequities be, Tom?
And I think it's more just police going outside of the law. Normally they're doing things that are unjust. That's what we're protesting. And so we would need...
So
I'm
Tom,
not.
the
I'm
murder
not
of
going to have
Tia
that. Like,
was within the law.
not the few bad apples shit. Like we all recognize that there is police brutality and so on,
Mhm.
and I'm very well aware of like the few bad apples fucking argument, right? Which is why I purposefully fucking avoided it as a way of saying that like all cops are bad,
Mhm.
right? Like this is about actions that every single police officer not only would engage in, but is fucking sworn to, have taken an oath to engage in defense of the state, right, and capital. So,
Right,
like,
but I don't have
I
an
don't
issue with
care about
them.
random instances of brutality.
I don't have.
I'm talking about literally going in and arresting somebody and carting them away to a prison cell is an act of violence,
Mhm.
right? That you think is perfectly justified, even if the person who is being carted away, who is having that violence meted out against them, is engaged in an action that you think is morally good.
Yeah, of course.
Cool. I just want to make that
Why?
clear.
So the
Yeah,
thing
like
that's a little
I
horrifying to me about where I
Why?
extrapolate that is that, you know, if
Let
when an
Tom,
officer
let Tom.
murders someone, if they're found not guilty or if they're just not arrested or they're cleared, then that is therefore the thing they should have done by that logic, and that's utterly horrifying.
I'm sorry, say that again.
So the idea that this is what they should go visit this violence upon people who violate the law, because you're holding the law as the should standard, then that would mean that cops who murder people and they either are cleared by a trial or are just never arrested or prosecuted or indicted should have killed them.
No. What are you talking about? Wait, so you're saying I think that just because somebody's not convicted, that therefore they were that their actions were righteous?
Or indicted.
Yeah.
No, not that their actions were morally right, but that they should have done them. The way that
But they were legally.
people who do these things. Even
I don't see how you make this kind of. I don't think there is a separation between these statements,
There
right?
seems to be this
Like,
existential should versus moral or something.
Right.
Well, no, it seems to me to be that, like, if you say somebody should do something, that means that is like the moral fucking.
No. I
like,
get what he's
action
trying to say. He's trying to separate morality from legality.
Of course.
That you can do.
But what are you talking about? Whose morality are you using? You want to go use the alt-right's morality and start and let them take over and let them
morality.
What? But
no, Tom, our morality, your morality. We were agreeing on moral propositions.
Sure.
Right? There are certain actions that are good for people to engage in.
Yes.
Right? Like, I'm not talking about the fucking alt-right's morality. I'm talking about yours and mine, right? And I was finding things that we agree on. And I was saying, I don't understand how you can make the moral judgment that an action is good, yet deserves like violent retribution for carrying it out, right? And you say that like the violent retribution is somehow morally neutral, although it should be engaged in. And that should statement implies to me that you think that it is a moral good for this action to be engaged in.
Right.
Right? I don't see how you can say that somebody should do something without making the judgment that it is a morally correct thing for them to do.
Yeah, so within protest, I think that, like, especially if we want to hold government accountable, the best thing to do is to cause damage to where it costs them money, right? But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't be held accountable for, like, I think we can do good things that will still have repercussions for them. Like, I don't think that we can all just say like, hey, let's
the division you're trying to make. I'm sorry, I just want to get to this point. The division that you're trying to make is one between operational stuff versus like morality in terms of
versus good.
Yeah, essentially.
Right, but yeah, there's a difference between morality and laws.
But
And
the laws are not
what
should. The law. If the laws are should, then how is it not just saying that the laws are moral?
Well, I'm saying they should be arrested because of the laws.
Morality.
Wait,
Well,
what?
here's what I'm gonna throw at you real
though?
quick. Here's what I want to throw at you real quick.
Yeah.
Our legal system is entirely based off of morality, because obviously it's based off of, like, every society at one point or another, whether it's established now or established thousands of years ago, they have laws, but they're all built off of a moral code that society follows to one extent or another, and what they
It's that
believe.
concept
in. I
of
mean,
justice.
whether it's the Golden Rule or the Hammurabi's Code or our current judicial system, it all involves morality to some degree or another. So you can't just separate the two and find them mutually exclusive.
Okay.
There is going to be
All right.
morality that's tied to the law.
Is somewhat, kind of. Are you guys aware of the phrase? What is it? Just because you have freedom of speech doesn't mean you have freedom of consequences.
Oh no.
Do any of you think we shouldn't have freedom of speech just because you should have consequences for that speech?
I don't think freedom
What
of
are you
speech
talking
exists.
about?
Period.
Yeah.
We don't have.
Okay, let's do this real quick. Okay, do you think that America was found, like, what kind of moral founding do you think that our country started with?
I'm confused as to what
Like
that
what,
has to do with
or I
anything.
guess, okay, so if you think so, I feel like you're kind of playing like a chicken and the egg game with like laws, and it's like we ought to follow laws because they're laws, but why are they laws? Like I don't really, I guess I want you to kind of go over why you think that we should follow laws that aren't just because they're not made yet. Like, how do you think laws that protect people come into being?
I'm not saying that we should follow laws. I'm saying that if we don't follow laws, we should face the consequences.
Why?
So
because you can't have a society if you just let everybody pick and choose when they do and don't follow laws based on whether or not they have a good excuse for it.
So, Tom, question about that. Tom, question about that. Do you consider that to be a political question? Because, and the reason I ask it that specific way is, we could talk about the last, every president of the United States, but we can give examples of, well, they broke the law. They were not, forced to abide by the letter of the law. And then that begs the question, oh, okay, so is law in and of itself a political question? Because if it is, that opens up basically this entire conversation, and there is no real justice at the center of it in terms of as it's motivated right now.
Yeah, I mean, look.
Oh,
I think that.
Mm-hmm. I just want to ask, okay, so if there was like a successful coup in the government, right, and then I don't know, it doesn't have to be Trump, it can be like whatever in that situation. So if they start, just using the powers they have to put in place things that fuck up a lot of shit, and they use leverage to basically create like unjust laws. So should we start adhering to those?
Again, you're saying whether or not we should follow the laws. I'm saying if you don't follow the laws, you should be arrested for it. These are different questions.
That's just a description.
I've got to pick up this thread because
okay, please.
The idea that any of us are capable of fully following all laws is already farcical. There are so many laws on the books that the federal government is literally incapable of even counting how many laws there are. We are almost certainly breaking laws having this conversation right now.
Probably.
So what we're talking about is selective enforcement of the law. And that selective enforcement is coming at the direction of these systems. And these systems are super, super, super flawed. So the idea that it's just if everyone just followed the law and we have to have laws, I understand.
Again,
where you're
I'm not
coming from,
saying
Tom,
follow
but I
the
just don't
law.
think it's that simple.
It's not that simple. I'm not saying
No,
follow the
he's
law.
saying he should be arrested. What he's saying is, right, is that like Rosa Parks should have been arrested. The people who like sat at the fucking the bar in that restaurant should have been fucking should have been arrested. Right,
Scott should have been
gay
sent
people
back.
gay people who were congregating in bars should have been arrested. Right, people who were you know, a couple of 100 years ago when people were just like engaged in a homosexual relationship, they should have been arrested, right? And that's something that I find morally reprehensible.
Yeah, I think that we can't pick and choose what laws we want to follow and not want to follow based on whether or not we think we have a good enough excuse for it. I think that we should instead change laws or...
What? Why? Why do we wait for
Tom-
long to change? That takes a very long time, and also a lot of protesting.
Aiko,
technically.
let me ask you something. Hold on, because Aiko keeps asking me these weird questions. Aiko, do you think we should have laws?
Yes, we do.
Why?
We should.
Why
have
should
laws
we have laws?
because we need to know how to. Okay, laws are based on like present or okay. Hold on. Let me gather myself in my brain because I'm stoned. Why do we have laws? Is that what you said? Because we can't really function without them. Like we need to have there be systems of engagement and yeah.
Okay, does anybody here think we shouldn't have laws?
I don't think anyone does.
That's a really complicated question.
Especially right now.
I don't think it's complicated. I think it's pretty simple. Yes, we should have
It's an
laws.
incredibly complicated question because what you think of as laws, like currently, I would say, yeah, sure, we probably shouldn't have the current legal and legislative system that we currently have.
Oh yeah.
There's actually a really good book on exactly this topic. It's by a guy.
Wait! I just thought of something. Okay, so do you think that my parents shouldn't have like gotten married? It was pretty fresh off the heels of it being it was recently legal.
Is this an interracial marriage thing?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, if it was, I think they should have gotten married.
Okay, but that's not.
Do you think they should have been arrested?
Yes, they should have been arrested for it. Yes.
For getting married?
Yes.
Do you think they should have been?
Oh my God,
This conversation is going to go.
I think we should change the laws, but I don't. That doesn't.
Yes, but do you understand how?
Should? Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Aiko.
No, it's just like, okay, so what's the line really? So if it's legal to just say like if us the government even just like suspects you of anything because they were scanning your face or I don't know if you're even just slightly
executed all those slaves.
Right. Well, yes.
Your skull shape wasn't the right size.
Okay, listen. Okay, so basically if if there was an uprising and people did what all of these white people that think black nationalism is like the exact same thing as white nationalism, if that's what happens and if there's like laws in place to like send all white people off into the middle of the ocean on like just rowboats, like
I'm so confused. What's going on right now?
I think I know where you're trying to go with this. Ultimately, I think I know where Tom's going with this too. I think for him, it's just black and white. If you break the law, regardless of what the law is, you should be punished for it until that law is changed. Even if you believe that law should be changed because morally it's reprehensible.
Wait, do you believe that punishment is like a moral action? Like, do you think that like executing an escaped slave is something you according to this argument, you think that's something that should be done, right? Do you think that that's the?
You're asking
think
Tom
that
or
would
me because
be
I
an
don't.
evil
I don't
action,
really
right?
understand.
That would be a morally bad action to carry out. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, of course.
Cool.
I really want to follow up Viv on that. Like,
Please,
if you
Hold
could
on, let
explain-
Vivian finish.
It's so close. Please don't. Don't do it. Okay, right. You think that would be a morally bad action to carry out, okay? And it would be carried out by the state's enforcers, right? Like back then, it probably wouldn't have been the police as you know them now, but like it would be carried out by the state enforcers. If we had that law now, right, it would be carried out by the police, okay? And when we say all cops are bad, that's all we fucking mean, right? That is a bad action that they've carried out. You think they should carry it out. I fucking wholly disagree. But you agree with me that it is an immoral action that they are carrying out.
Right.
And when we say all cops are bad, what we're saying is they are going to carry out immoral actions against people because it's what they're sworn to do.
Yeah,
Okay,
I,
so you
I
agree,
understand
right?
what you mean.
You agree, Tom. You're ACAB here. You're fucking 13, 12, all right? Get it tattooed on your fucking forehead.
No, I still disagree with you.
No. Oh my God, Tom.
I still disagree with you because you're
already
talking about. No, I did not. No, I didn't. Hold on. Because you're still saying that that each individual is bad regardless of what they do. So even if I give an example of somebody who doesn't do anything wrong, you are saying that individual is still bad. You have already said that. So I fundamentally disagree with the framing of this. Anyways.
Yeah, because they've made an oath to carry out these actions that you think are immoral, Tom. By becoming a police officer, they have sworn an oath to carry out actions that you have just agreed are immoral.
But those don't
It's
actually
just like doctors
exist.
Who commit to the, it's like doctors who commit to the Hippocratic Oath. If you go against that oath, you are going to lose your doctor's license. So essentially, if you're upholding that oath, that means you continue to be a doctor. Same with police, you have to uphold the law. Even if that law is morally reprehensible and shit, they still will have to uphold it, or else they're not being a cop, aka all cops are bad.
Yeah, but again, we're using examples from hundreds of years ago to say that cops today are all bastards. Like that's
well, and they still are because there is still those legacy laws, and many of them persisting in terms of the white supremacist structure of our laws and especially our enforcers.
So, like what?
So do you think it should be a ticketed offense for people to have a broken tail light on their car? Just curious. I like that.
Yes.
I'm asking because I'm setting up another question.
Yes.
That's what I'm saying. You guys
Okay.
can't use these
So
hypotheticals at this point. It's established that it doesn't matter what extent. If it's a law, it has to be followed in his mind.
He wants to keep going down the same.
Yeah, but this is where it's all fucking weird, right? Because he says it should be followed, but it's an immoral action for the law to be enforced, right? And yet it's not a bad thing for the law to be enforced. It should be like
yeah, somebody has to do it.
And the thing about that should that makes us
going on here.
The reason I bring up that question very specifically, and I really want to hear your answer to this, Tom, is that it's an example of a law that where if you actually break down this the specifics of it, it's a on paper universally understandable law. Have taillights on your car that work. That seems to make sense. But the fact that it is overwhelmingly black and brown people who have no business representing the number of statistics that they do being charged with this particular thing, that should tell you there's something broken in society within the enforcement of what seems like a regular thing.
Yeah, I agree with that.
You get what I'm going at with that?
Yeah, I agree. There's something broken within the system of how laws are enforced, and we need to fix the system, not get rid of it.
Well, sometimes in order to fix the system, you have to get rid of it and start from scratch.
Sometimes I wouldn't say in this case. I think that, like, for the most part,
especially when it's a genocidal white supremacist settler colonial foundation that your entire system is rooted in and is built upon and was built upon with slave labor for an extended period. Anyway, sorry.
You're never gonna sway him on that shit.
I mean, I don't disagree with that. I don't disagree with what Mintnerd said, but that I don't think that makes the system inherently bad.
Genocide and settler colonialism and the slave trade are not inherently bad.
No, I'm saying I said the system. I said the system. You're that is a massive straw man. No, it is not.
No, Tom.
Yes,
Tom. That's not a straw man, because you literally just admitted and seemed to recognize that there are disproportionalities with how the law is meted out.
Right.
Which points to a systemic issue. I think the most obvious one being one of racism. That is, these laws that even if you can make a justification for them, are disproportionately meted out against people of color in this country.
Right. We should fix that.
Recognize that.
Yeah.
I think I understand his what his train of thought is here. He thinks that is a problem with the system, but that's not just the system itself.
Correct.
That doesn't represent
that the system can be retuned.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, that
well,
not
that it's not part of the recipe. It's not baked in the cake. It's just a symptom of it.
Exactly.
So
that's wrong. Unfortunately, it's wrong.
Historical
this is
and
the problem.
Kind of gross, but yeah, even though we can draw a straight line from the transportation of slaves to the way that both our education system has historically and even still contemporarily talked about the construct of race and how our laws have been built around that construct of race, even though we can draw a straight line from that to very contemporary policy like redlining and continuing policy, especially financial policy and banking in terms of access to basic resources for the descendants of enslaved people, even though we can draw that straight line from pre-foundation to modernity, it is still not an inherently bad.
Correct.
I'm sorry.
So no. That's a ridiculous way of framing it. If you even want to, no. Hold on. If you can have like the same system, but if it didn't have that history, then we wouldn't have those laws. Do you disagree with that, Mintnerd?
If it didn't have that history, like if we didn't have the legacy of colonialism, I'd hope we'd have some kind of hyper-communist iteration of the Great Law of Peace on the eastern third of the country, third of Turtle Island. I don't know.
Say we have the same system just without the bugs. You're saying that that
bugs are worked in.
Yeah, it's not
a bug, it's a feature.
It's
grown from the bugs.
This is tantamount to saying, like, what if you had America that wasn't racist? It's like, well, okay, you wouldn't have a racist America.
No, so
we have a racist America. You have to deal with that history.
Nobody's denying that here, though. You guys can keep bringing that up. Nobody here is denying it.
No, but it's built in the, it is built in the, it's in the cement that we built this fucking.
It is part of the DNA, brother.
Cool. Yeah. So other countries
our
that have
occupation
we were founded
of this,
by
of
Christian
this, of this
extremists.
Land.
Sure.
Our occupation of this land is foundational in our law as it exists, and we are a hostile occupying entity in that way. So foundationally, our laws are going to be inflicted upon people in that way.
I mean, from that point, I guess, if that's your view, then I literally have no way of arguing past it as long as we still exist on this land. But
we're a 200, 300 year sub-sophomoric young nation that is occupying a space that had its own legacy history for thousands upon thousands of years. So I think that's the appropriate context. Yeah.
Okay. I disagree, but my point is that there are countries that have similar systems and similar laws to us with homogenous societies, and they're able to exist without the same racist and whatever words you want to put in for whatever color you want to put in front of it, supremacist societies, right? Or systems.
Listen to what you said. Hang on. Listen to what you said, though. You said homogenous society. It's not going to, there's not really going to be the same type of racial relationships or any of the dynamics that we've seen in the past in those countries. You can't use those as examples because it's comparing apples and oranges, man.
No, the point is that the system is the point is that it is bugs in the system. That it's not the system itself. It is bugs in the system. If other countries can have the same system, yes, that's fine. They're intentional. That doesn't that
other countries are very, very similar, Tom. Other countries are very like, I mean, even here in the United Kingdom, I would say the same. Even though we don't have an indigenous peoples that are currently being fucking like oppressed and treated like shit, like we are an imperialist white supremacist state. That continues to treat people of color, people who do not meet up with the quasi-fascistic like default human being, like the expectations of that. Like we still treat them like shit. They are still treated unfairly according to the law.
The question that I have for Tom is, what's the like kind of directionality of this argument? What's the political outcome of this argument? Because you referenced like, you know, homogenous countries around the world. So what, should the United States just work to be more homogenous racially? Or
I mean, I don't know. By
work
this
to
logic,
address
we
the
shouldn't have
underlying
same-sex
systemic
couples.
racial issues that we discussed earlier?
Wait, what did you just say?
I said by this logic, we shouldn't have same-sex couples, and then we would have a homogenous society.
I don't know.
You don't understand.
I don't even know what that means.
Or say,
Wait,
sorry,
what
same
is
race.
that?
Sorry, same
Homogenous.
race. I'm sorry. I said same
Oh,
sex the second time.
You know, you flip those two in your head. Normal. It's very normal.
I mean,
So
I
you
don't
think-
know if
wait,
it was
but
said.
Is it because
Sorry,
of?
Aiko, go ahead.
Is it wait? So the mix. So like you said, having two white people make another white person is also bad. Like because what? Because they're perpetuating whiteness. Like what is the?
Yes, we
I
went
don't
over
get
this
it.
earlier. Yeah. Like if
That's
you
not a
can't.
thing, though.
No.
Doesn't end white supremacy.
Existing mixed race people. What do we do with them, Tom?
Say that again.
What do we do with the existing mixed race people?
Nothing.
No, he's saying that
They're good.
No, he's saying that the bad, like we ought to be morally consistent, I guess.
We should be more mixed race.
We should all, no one should be like just white. Everyone should
like
not,
having more.
Why are we here now?
Okay, Vivian, hold on, Vivian, let me catch you up. Okay, so this all started with a tweet where I said, by the same logic of ACAB, we could also say that anybody who is in a same race relationship having children is also a bastard. Meaning, like, they are perpetuating racism by continuing to have different races. Yes.
They'd be perpetuating racism by teaching their children that they are like white, that like their settler identity is the good thing. Yeah, but if they're going to teach their children about how to deconstruct that whiteness, then they're not perpetuating racism by having a child with the person they fell in love with or for whatever reason wanted to have a child with.
Yeah, you're saying, hold on, you're saying that it's not bad, but we are saying that they are, but you're saying that it's not bad because they fell in love, yet one way or the other, racism is still going to exist by people continuing to have different races.
No, a person's
No,
autonomy.
he said the thing. He said the dumb thing.
He said the thing.
Racism is going to continue if people have different races, right? And I don't think that that's true. I think that you can look at because we don't look at somebody with like brown or I guess like gingers get some shit sometimes, but like there's not like a system by which we classify those people and treat them differently in society as a generality, right? Like we pretty much don't do that. Same for like people with fucking eye color. Same for people with like, right? So like people having different skin colors doesn't mean inherently that like some people with a skin color are going to be oppressed within that society. It doesn't have to, right? That's why when people talk about like critical race theory, they talk about abolishing whiteness, as in they talk about
I didn't say that.
abolishing the in group, right? It's not like we want to make everybody fucking mixed race. It's like we want to get rid of the idea that people usually with white skin, right, are somehow the good group and everybody else is sort of like lesser than. We can get rid of that idea while still having people who have white skin.
I agree.
Like, yeah.
I don't disagree with that. That doesn't change what I said.
But it does, though.
I think it does, because
no. You guys are making it sound like you're making it sound like I said that's the only way to get rid of racism, and that's not what I said.
Well,
no, they're
I think
your
you're
idea.
fundamentally saying
Two questions.
Because...
Two questions.
Hold on. Let Chase get in. He hasn't said anything in a while.
All I'm just trying to make sure that we're on the same page here, because race purely a social construct. I think we're all aware the concept of whiteness has evolved over time. Who is and isn't white has evolved over time, right? I think we all are fully aware of this, even Tom. So I'm saying that two white people having a kid who is also white, honestly, by a fluke, that kid may not even be considered white, depending on some.
It doesn't have to be white.
Yeah, like that is not even necessarily true.
Ultimately,
And
we really
honestly,
if that kid wasn't white.
even if we had more of what we would consider today mixed race couples, these are all just social ideas. So I don't think that's a fair comparison when you're talking about like an actual built up system of laws and frameworks that are in some cases used for oppression. Like, I don't think that it's a fair comparison, Tom.
Can they still be used for oppression? Can they still be used for oppression if there are no longer white and no, like people? Can the laws or that system still be used for oppression if everybody is some sort of like brown color and we all look very similar in some ways?
If we eliminate the concept of race altogether, yeah, that's just one aspect of upon which some people are marginalized.
Correct.
It's not all of it.
Correct. But I was saying based on race.
We are dancing around this at this point, and I have to ask Tom the question: do you literally think racism is going to be solved by everybody like essentially just like fucking with another race until we get to some point where we're like post-racial or something? Is that the argument you're making?
That if there were no more races, that there wouldn't be racism anymore. Yeah, that's my argument.
Okay, cool. There are multiple different ways by which we can achieve the abolition of race.
I agree with that. I agree with that. Again, you guys are making it sound like I'm saying that's the only way. I never said that. That never came out of my mouth.
No, I get it.
Okay,
I totally
what you
get
said
it. I
was
want to
that
say that
ACAB was the same logic as saying that like people who have white kids and like
but that's because you
There's
think
a
the
lot
system
to
is
unpack.
inherently bad from the beginning. Everybody else that like I've had this conversation with, they don't explain it the same way as you do, Vivian, because they don't think the whole system is inherently bad by itself. They think that all of these cops perpetuate a bad system, but
random people, that doesn't mean anything.
right. So when I make this argument, I'm making this argument against those
also,
people.
Tom, Flossie wants me to remind you that he's here and that his part native as needs to stop playing the Joker. I don't know.
What's really hilarious to me about this conversation is there are a bunch of parts of this that I would actually agree with Tom on, but he's making such weird ass comparisons that I can't even get on board. Like, I am not really.
I have to take it to an extreme to make my point, right?
No, don't, Tom.
But you're
Your
not.
idea
You're
of
not making your
extreme.
point.
I am
You're
making
not.
my
You just-
point. You
Right,
guys
you
are
just-
straw
you just look
manning
like
it.
a bit of a tit when you say something like ACAB is the same logic as whatever the fuck it was that your tweet was. Like that, it's a really silly thing to say. It's just going to make people go,
Fine,
Jesus
it's
Christ,
a silly
Tom
thing.
dude is a fucking idiot.
It's still correct. I disagree with the
No, it's
system
not.
being fundamentally bad, and it can be
There's a
fixed.
fundamental disconnect
Right,
here.
okay, so wait, you're talking about like original sin type shit, right? Like you don't choose what color your skin is at birth, Tom. You choose whether to become a cop and swear an oath to uphold and enforce immoral laws, right?
Correct.
These are two very different fucking situations. I'm not saying somebody is
True.
essentially bad because they are a cop. They can hang up their fucking badge and become not a bad person, right? Just like
Again,
So-
when I make this tweet, I said I'm not arguing against Vivian. I'm arguing against everybody else that I've ever had this conversation with, except for Vivian.
Oh, right. Okay. So I'm the only sensible leftist.
I mean,
like that,
I
that's
disagree
fine.
with you too, but that was sure.
We need to. Okay.
Look, there are a lot of dumb leftists out there. Here's the point
Your
about
argument
ACAB, right?
makes more sense than theirs. I will give you that.
Cool. Here's the point about ACAB, though, right? It's not meant to be a fucking like cogent argument. I believe it's
Of
perfectly
course.
fucking supportable, but it's not used in that fashion in general, right? We don't say
It's supposed to be
ACAB convince
provocative.
people who love the police that the police are bastards, right? It's used as a rallying cry. It's used as a way to further radicalize people who are already kind of like vaguely on your side, right? It's used for a sense of unity. It's used as it's used just to vent sometimes, right? For people who live in these oppressive structures who are repeatedly have immoral actions carried out against them by the police, right? And it's useful for all these fucking ways. And I always get really, really fucking annoyed whenever I have a conversation with someone like Book Smarts, right? I fucking love Book Smarts, but he seems to think that the only reason words should come out of your mouth is to convince somebody who disagrees with you to agree with you. And there are so many other uses for rhetoric. And I don't care if somebody who doesn't, who hears ACAB goes, well, that sounds a bit fucking stupid, right? Because they're probably not the people that I'm talking to.
So you're saying like it should entice like a feeling to get them to educate themselves?
I mean, it should
It's not
be, but
for
it's probably not going
everyone. It's like it's not
Or to
to
organize.
attract you.
Yeah,
It's like you're not the target
I understand
audience
that.
because you're not the same, like you're not on the same page, and therefore like it's a different, it's not for you. And that's what I was talking about like way long ago when I was saying about how not everything is for you, but you're used to having everything marketed to you, and therefore like a lot of like cis white presenting men are used to being
like,
the
this
focus.
is a bad argument. It doesn't convince me. Therefore, you probably shouldn't say it. It's like,
No,
Yeah,
that wasn't
exactly.
my
Like,
argument.
No one asked you about it. I mean, not you specifically right now. I'm just saying, like, you know,
Yeah, let me
people
give you an
wander in.
Here,
and
give
they're
me
like, "Let's-"
just a second. I gotta grab something.
Sure.
I think fundamentally it's not gonna line up properly if ultimately you think that it's a separate issue from what's built into the system.
So I want to know, Chase, can you
Actually-
say this in a way that you agree with?
Can I say
Reword what I'm saying in a way that you agree with.
which part of what you're saying? I can't reword the fucking weird babies or sporting systemic racism thing in a
I didn't say anything about babies.
Okay, Tom. Wait,
Chase,
okay, I'm gonna
Chase,
read
it's hard for
Talia's,
me to listen when you
message,
talk
okay?
because
Let me
hold
just-
on. I got something important to say. Chase,
I'm just gonna read this,
Chase. It's
okay?
really hard for me to listen to you when you talk because you're so pretty. It's really hard because like
Tom, stop.
I try
Hold
to
on,
hear
I'm
the
gonna
words.
read Talia's thing. Stop. We're not at that point yet, okay?
What?
It's not that time yet. Not now, Tom. I'm reading out Talia's thing. ACAB is a cry out of marginalized groups to acknowledge and rally in their oppression. It is not meant for privileged white dudes who think the law is the end all be all. I
Yeah,
just
and
felt
and,
like
and I wanted to I wanted to say so this was an illuminating or at least an identifying moment for me, right, in fucking media and shit. So Jake Hanahan, he's a reporter I do respect. He has some opinions I disagree with, but he's a reporter I very much respect. Does conflict reporting around the world, right? He went to Ukraine to speak to some of the anarchist groups there that were like opposing Ukrainian fascism. You know, and it is a big problem over there with the fucking Azov battalion and all that shit. But they were fucking like graffitiing in a train station, right? Just like painting a huge fucking like anarchist symbol on the wall. And Jake asked them like, well, what do you think about like how some people in the community might react to this? Who might say, you know, it might make your group look worse because you're sort of vandalizing property. And the reply was that like you can't speak to everybody and convince everybody of your position, right? But like the purpose of putting this graffiti up was to let other people who are like-minded know that they were there, right? And to give them a point to rally to, right?
Yeah.
You have to collect the people around you who already agree with you and point them in the direction of doing some good before you can even think about like convincing the broader fucking public, right? You can't convince everybody on your own.
Yeah.
You have to have a fucking group and a base to do it with, and that sort of exemplifies why like rhetoric is just not. It's not always used to like convince people who disagree with you, and it shouldn't be. There are too many uses for rhetoric. So honestly, fuck what you think about ACAB. But you agreed with me earlier that all cops will engage in immoral acts.
Yeah.
You agreed with me earlier.
I don't know that they will all engage in immoral acts. Your specific example of them engaging in that
Sorry, my
act.
bad. All cops have already engaged in an immoral act by swearing to uphold unjust laws and enforce in an immoral fashion those unjust laws against people who are carrying out no immoral actions. You agreed with that throughout the course of this conversation. So, like, you're on the same side of me. You think all cops are bastards.
Okay.
Yeah, you kind of backed yourself into a corner, bud.
No, I mean, I don't disagree with that. The problem is that when we're looking at the system, as I've said numerous times, I don't think that the system itself is inherently bad. I think that, like, I know that you don't like the bad apples argument, but I do think that like we're able to have higher up investigatory.
How do we solve the issue?
I feel like
racism again.
I feel
Let's
like
go back to systemic racism.
I feel like we can have higher up investigatory offices that are third party that are able to handle a lot of these things to where it's not like a system within a system.
I get where you're going with this. Basically, you're saying that you would like, or at least you think that there is a possibility that all the people that are within law enforcement as a whole, that we can individually pluck and weed all the shitty, like particularly shitty cops or whatever out of the system, and everyone who didn't actively engage in those same types of behaviors can still like be left alone in the position they're in now and be pat on the head like good boy, like good job, you didn't actively commit a racism or something.
No, I mean,
you
I
could
think
still collect your pension and salary or whatever the fuck.
I think most of them, if they actually felt as though there were consequences to their actions, then this would just de-incentivize those actions from the beginning instead of saying that we're going to get rid of everybody except for the good ones. I think that most of them would just become good ones.
So how does that fit into the context of a political environment where you have a particular political party, which, you know, you don't seem to like publicly align yourself with, but you seem to like flirt with in terms of conservatism, that promotes those injustices, actually sees them as a feature, not a bug of the system?
I mean, I publicly align myself with them. I call myself a conservative, but
Yeah,
that's
but
fine.
you know.
That's. I was trying to give you the best possible case here.
You're being generous, Tom.
I think it's generous to say I'm not a I think it's I think it is
think
generous
that-
to call me a
Yeah, it
conservative
would be
and to,
generous to say you're not a conservative.
no, I
you
think
know.
it's
It would be
generous
very
to
generous.
to call
It
me a
would be judging
conservative.
you
It would be a lie.
and you say that you are. Yeah. Because fuck conservatives and fuck conservatism.
Republicans are a
Basically.
problem.